It was a cold Tuesday morning in Atlanta, Georgia, and the gleaming corporate headquarters of Langston Technologies Incorporated buzzed with the usual tension of quarterly review week. Employees rushed to and from their desks, managers barked orders, and somewhere in the background, the maintenance staff moved like shadows, seen but never acknowledged. But today, something was different. Hidden behind a faded cap, oversized coveralls, and latex gloves, Robert Ellis, the 52-year-old CEO of the tech giant, rolled a mop bucket down the hallway of his own company. This wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't for show. Robert had built Langston from the ground up, blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights. But recently, complaints from black and brown employees had started to stack up. Claims of hostile treatment, discrimination, and particularly, one name kept surfacing: Gary Whitman, a regional operations manager. Now, Robert could have sat in his cushy top-floor office and sent HR down to investigate. But that wasn't how he operated. He wanted to see it, hear it, feel it. So, for one day, the CEO became the janitor. From the moment he stepped onto the floor where Gary managed the tech support department, Robert could feel it. The air was different. Thick with tension. A black female employee, Tasha, barely looked up as she quietly whispered to another colleague. Gary's voice echoed across the space, loud and commanding. "Marcus, if you people actually showed up on time, maybe you wouldn't be mopping floors your whole life." Robert paused. "You people." His grip on the mop handle tightened. Gary didn't notice him standing a few feet away, just another invisible cleaner in the room. Over the next 3 hours, Robert witnessed what could only be described as covert abuse, and sometimes it wasn't even that covert. Gary routinely belittled black staff, questioned their qualifications in front of others, and gave demeaning assignments well below their job level. White employees. He smiled at them, joked with them, bought them lunch. Then came the boiling point. Tasha, a junior developer with a 4.0 GPA from Georgia Tech and glowing internal reviews, approached Gary's desk with a project update. Before she could even speak, Gary raised his hand. "Tasha, did I say I wanted to hear from you?" She paused, confused. "You people always think you know everything," he snapped. "Maybe if you focused more on your attitude and less on trying to act smart, you'd actually make something of yourself." The room went silent. That's when Robert dropped the mop. The loud clack echoed through the open space. All eyes turned. Gary rolled his eyes. "Can you not clean during work hours? Some of us are trying to get real work done." Robert stepped forward, slowly removing his cap. "Funny," he said, eyes locked onto Gary. "Because I've been trying to figure out all morning how someone like you got a management position here." Gary laughed awkwardly. "Look, man, just do your job and you first." Robert unzipped the coveralls and revealed a crisp, branded Langston Technologies shirt beneath it, with an executive badge clipped to the collar. The room went dead silent. Tasha's eyes widened. Marcus stood frozen in place. You're not the janitor?" Gary stammered. "No," Robert replied, his voice steady, ice-cold. "I'm the founder and CEO of this company." Robert walked straight up to Gary and handed him a sealed envelope. "This is your termination letter. Effective immediately. Your access to company systems is revoked. Security will escort you out." Gary turned beet red, sputtering excuses. "This is ridiculous. You can't do this." "I just did," Robert snapped. "I've read every complaint about you. I've watched 3 hours of you today. You belittle, harass, and try to diminish the people who make this company what it is. And let me be clear, Langston Technologies does not tolerate racism." The room, still silent, slowly broke into whispered cheers. Some clapped. Tasha covered her mouth, eyes watering. Marcus looked like someone had just lifted a 10-ton weight off his chest. Gary stormed out, escorted by security, humiliated and defeated. Robert addressed the floor. "For too long, people like Gary have thrived in the shadows, protected by position, hidden behind power. But not anymore. Not while I'm here." Tasha stepped forward, wiping her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Robert shook her hand. "No need. You earned your place here. I'm just sorry it took me this long to see what was really happening." By the end of the day, Robert implemented a new initiative: an anonymous employee feedback program, quarterly bias training, and a full audit of all management teams, with input directly from staff. This story isn't just about a racist manager getting fired. It's about the silent battles people fight every day, being spoken over, dismissed, and disrespected simply because of who they are. It's about leaders stepping up, not just when it's easy, but when it's uncomfortable. And most of all, it's about justice, real, raw, and overdue. But as Robert returned to his office later that evening, he found an unsigned letter sitting on his desk. Inside was a printed email, one that implied Gary wasn't the only manager acting this way. In fact, there were more, and some of them were even higher up the chain. Robert sat back, the letter trembling in his hands. Because if what this message said was true, the corruption wasn't just in one department. It ran deeper, much deeper. The letter didn't have a name, no return address. Just a few pages, cold, typed, clinical. But the content, it hit like a punch to the chest. It outlined a pattern of discriminatory promotion practices, including falsified performance reviews, intentionally blocked raises, and even sabotaged internal transfers, specifically targeting black employees and other people of color. And the worst part? It named Vice President Cynthia Darrow and Chief Operating Officer Tom Whitaker, two of the highest-ranking execs at Langston. Robert sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the pages, his heart pounding. If this was true, it meant the company he built from scratch, on a promise of equity, of diversity, of justice, was rotting from the inside out. He had to know. Let us know where you are watching from in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on your notification bell so that you can be the first to enjoy our amazing stories. Over the next 48 hours, Robert operated in silence. No press statements. No HR briefings. He pulled employee files himself. He scanned emails from internal whistleblowers. And what he found was damning. Tasha, the junior developer Gary once humiliated, she'd been up for a promotion 3 times, and each time it was overlooked due to communication skills, despite her glowing peer reviews. Marcus, denied a lateral transfer to software design, even after finishing an internal certification. He even found a memo, sent from Tom Whitaker to HR, stating, "We need fewer culture fit issues in leadership. Keep an eye on diversity hires." It wasn't subtle. It was a code of quiet exclusion dressed up in corporate language. Robert was stunned, sickened, furious. But this wasn't going to be solved with another dramatic firing. He needed proof. Robert called his in-house legal counsel and one trusted HR director, Lisa Moreno, a Latina woman who'd seen her own fair share of bias in the company. Together, they began documenting everything. Lisa leaked an internal memo under Robert's instruction, posing as if HR would now require senior managers to explain their diversity efforts at upcoming board meetings. It was bait, a test, to see who would panic. And Cynthia Darrow? She took it. Within hours of the memo going out, Lisa forwarded Robert an email Cynthia had accidentally sent to the wrong recipient. "We need to clean up the files before that review. I don't want any of those DEI metrics coming back to bite us. And for the love of God, keep Robert out of this." There it was. Not just guilt. Intentional cover-up. Robert knew what had to be done. It was Friday morning. A boardroom of glass and silence. Cynthia sat at the head of the table, her pearl earrings glinting beneath the ceiling lights. Tom sat beside her, arms crossed, confidence oozing like oil. Robert walked in, flanked by Lisa and the legal counsel. He placed a thick manila folder on the table. "Before we begin, I want to share some findings." Inside the folder were copies of emails, altered evaluations, and direct quotes from employees, some dating back 5 years. Cynthia's face twitched. Tom leaned forward, coldly amused. "This is cute, Robert," he said. "Trying to play detective. But you're forgetting something." Robert narrowed his eyes. "What's that?" Tom smirked. "We built this place with you. You go after us, you bring the whole tower down." There it was. The real confession. This wasn't just racism. This was a conspiracy to maintain a white power structure at the top, carefully hidden behind spreadsheets and HR language. And they thought they were untouchable. Robert stood still. Then maybe the tower deserves to fall. Lisa reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "I've been recording this entire meeting," she said calmly, per Georgia's single-party consent law. Cynthia jumped to her feet. "You can't." "We just did," Lisa interrupted. But before Robert could speak again, the door to the boardroom burst open. An assistant rushed in, out of breath. "Sir, there's something you need to see." Everyone stared. Robert took the tablet she handed him. It was a breaking news headline. "Langston Technologies under federal investigation for discrimination practices. Former employee speaks out." Under the title was a picture of someone Robert recognized instantly, Deshaun Walker. He hadn't worked at Langston in years. But Deshaun had been one of the first black engineers Robert hired, and also one of the first to mysteriously disappear after being denied a leadership role. Now, it seemed he was speaking out, and not just to the press. He was cooperating with federal authorities. Robert looked up from the screen. The stakes had just changed. This wasn't just internal anymore. This was federal. Robert turned to Cynthia and Tom, his voice calm but thunderous. "This isn't a house cleaning anymore. This is a reckoning. And if either of you think I'm going to protect you over the people this company was built for, you've grossly underestimated who I am." But just as Robert finished his sentence, another assistant ran in, this time visibly shaken. She whispered something in Robert's ear. His face went pale. He turned slowly to the room. "There's been a breach. Someone leaked our internal server logs. All of it. Every deleted file. Every email." Tom stood. "What? Who would do that?" Robert clenched his jaw. Because there was only one person with that kind of access. And he hadn't spoken to them in over a year. His own estranged brother. Robert sat motionless in the glass conference room, the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders like concrete. Every eye in the room was on him. Lisa, Cynthia, Tom, the board members, the legal team. The assistant's words still echoed in his ears. "Sir, the breach came from a personal login. From an IP address linked to Brandon Ellis." Robert hadn't spoken to his brother in over a year. Not since the fallout. Not since the last time Brandon begged him to act on the discrimination complaints. Back when Robert was still willfully blind to what was festering in the company. Back when he was part of the silence. Now, Brandon hadn't just blown the whistle. He'd blown the whole roof off. Robert's mind reeled back to a memory, early 2023. Brandon had been a mid-level engineer at Langston for nearly 5 years. Sharp, talented, outspoken, and unafraid to call out microaggressions others ignored. But that made him a target. He came to Robert in confidence, showed him screenshots, raised concerns about promotion statistics and racially skewed exit interviews. He begged his older brother, the man with the power to fix it, to intervene. But Robert hesitated, feared disruption, feared rocking the boat he'd worked so hard to board. "You've got to choose, Rob," Brandon had said bitterly. "Either be their shield, or be our voice." Robert never made that choice. Brandon resigned 3 weeks later. And Robert didn't stop him. Now here they were. The breach had exposed everything. Salaries, evaluations, internal complaint dismissals, even the hush money HR paid to at least 2 former employees. Worse, news outlets were already dissecting it. Langston Technologies, once held up as a diversity-forward tech giant, was now trending on social media under the hashtag #LangstonLies. Investors were calling. The board was panicking. Cynthia and Tom, they were already plotting damage control. "This is slander," Cynthia snapped, pacing. We need to release a statement and find a legal path to discredit this breach. Lisa cut in. Discredit the truth? Is that what we're doing now? Tom turned to Robert. You have to say it was a rogue actor. Your brother's clearly unstable. But Robert wasn't listening to them anymore. Because in his heart, he knew Brandon wasn't unstable. He was right. Later that night, under the cover of darkness, Robert pulled up to a small community center in East Atlanta. The address was buried in a forgotten notebook, one of the last things Brandon ever gave him. Inside, he found his brother teaching coding to a room full of black teens. He hadn't just left the company. He built his own version of what Langston should have been. When the class ended, Brandon looked up and froze. The two men locked eyes. A year of silence passed between them in seconds. You finally came, Brandon said. Robert nodded. You gave me a chance to choose. I chose wrong. Brandon didn't reply. He didn't have to. Because sometimes silence was louder than forgiveness. Back at Langston HQ, Robert made a decision. He wasn't going to defend the company. He was going to dismantle the system that broke it. The next morning, he stepped into the boardroom, not with a press release, but with resignation letters. Not his, but Cynthia's and Tom's. I want both of you out, he said coldly. Effective immediately. Cynthia hissed. You don't have that kind of authority. Robert slid a folder across the table. Turns out, I do. See, while you were busy padding stats and covering your tracks, I quietly consolidated voting power last year. The board. They already signed off. Tom lunged from his chair, but security was already in place. Cameras were rolling. And just like Gary before them, Cynthia and Tom were escorted out in front of staff they once silenced. But the fight wasn't over. Hours later, Robert returned to his office. He looked out the window of the 23rd floor, watching the skyline, watching the storm clouds roll in. Lisa entered, her face tight. You need to see this, she said, handing him a printout. It was a leaked legal document. Tom Whitaker had already filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against Robert personally, claiming discrimination against him. But that wasn't the worst part. Attached was a list of names, senior employees ready to testify on Tom's behalf. People Robert trusted. People who had been silent this whole time. And at the top of that list, Langston's own head of public relations. The same person tasked with defending the company now was preparing to betray it. Robert sat down slowly. The reckoning was far from over. Because when you pull back the curtain on a corrupt system, the rats don't run, they fight. Lisa stared at the printout in Robert's hand. A photo of him shaking hands with a DOJ official named James R. Halston. But it wasn't from any press event. It was a private meeting. One Robert vaguely remembered from last year, after his diversity hiring initiative caught national media attention. He remembered being warned to tread carefully. Now he understood why. Lisa scanned the note again. This goes deeper than you think. You're not just exposing a company. You're stepping into a war. Robert leaned back in his chair. His mind was racing. Why would the DOJ care about this? He whispered. Lisa looked at him, her voice barely a breath. Unless what we uncovered at Langston connects to something bigger. Lisa had another surprise. She'd found a restricted folder on the internal Langston server, buried behind dummy code and inaccessible without a VPN trace from another country. Inside, thousands of employee profiles. Not resumes. Behavioral tracking files. Each file logged emails, keystrokes, location pings, even bathroom schedules. Robert's blood ran cold. They weren't just monitoring productivity, he said. They were profiling people. Lisa nodded. And guess who's being flagged the most? She clicked on a heat map overlay. Black employees. Women. LGBTQ staff. Red flags next to names with notes like, too vocal, insubordinate, may attempt unionization. Robert's fists clenched. Langston wasn't just corrupt. It was systematically targeting its most vulnerable employees. The next morning, Robert received a call from an unknown number. A calm, authoritative voice came on the line. "Mr. Ellis. This is Agent Halston from the Department of Justice. We need to speak. In person." Robert hesitated. "Is this about Langston?" There was a pause. "Langston is just the doorway, Mr. Ellis. What you found ties into a much broader network. But be advised, others are now aware of your investigation, and they're not pleased." Robert's heart dropped. "Meet me tonight. Washington, D.C. Roosevelt Building. Discretion is key." Robert didn't tell anyone, not even Lisa. He packed a single bag, left after dark, and took a one-way flight to D.C. The Roosevelt Building was a fortress. High stone walls, steel-framed windows, and a sense of heavy silence that swallowed you whole. Agent Halston met him in a dim hallway, flanked by two other officials. They led Robert to a private room. The walls were soundproof. No phones. No recording devices. Halston wasted no time. He slid a classified file across the table. The cover stamped. "Project Clean Hands." Let us know where you are watching from in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe, like and turn on your notification bell so that you can be the first to enjoy our amazing stories. Inside the file were over 100 pages of data, tracing how multiple Fortune 500 companies, including Langston, had shared employee data with a third-party consulting firm. A firm with ties to federal contracts, to political lobbyists, and to government surveillance programs. Langston wasn't just using behavioral profiling for internal purposes. They were selling it. Agent Halston outlined the plan. Langston had been under investigation for months, but there was no smoking gun until Robert blew the whistle. Now, the DOJ wanted Robert's help. He would wear a wire. Re-enter Langston under the guise of reconciliation. Pretend to settle. Pretend to forgive. Meanwhile, the DOJ would use his access to retrieve the full server logs and catch the entire executive network in the act. Robert hesitated. "You want me to go back in there, unarmed, surrounded by people who want me destroyed?" Halston nodded. "And make them trust you again. Just long enough." Back in Chicago, Robert walked through the Langston lobby in a tailored suit. Whispers followed him down the hall. Some looked away. Some nodded in solidarity. But the executives? They smiled too much. Karen was still out, put on leave pending investigation. Tom, however, greeted Robert in the hallway. "Well, look who's back. Ready to move past all that whistleblower drama, huh?" Robert forced a smile. "Let's just say, I'm thinking long-term now." That week, Robert held a reconciliation lunch meeting with the board. He complimented Tom, laughed at old stories, even praised the resilience of Langston, all while the wire beneath his shirt captured every breath, every lie, every careless whisper. Lisa, looped into the operation, pretended to distance herself, just another pawn in the theater. Then came the moment they'd waited for. Tom leaned in, drunk on arrogance, and said, "You really had us worried, Rob. But you played your part like a champ. Now we just have to finish wiping those little files off the system, then it's back to business." But what no one knew was that someone else was listening. That same night, Lisa received an untraceable text. "You think you're in control, but you're not the only ones recording." Attached, a screenshot of her laptop webcam, taken from inside her apartment. Lisa froze, because the image had one horrifying detail: the reflection of a man's silhouette standing behind her. By morning, the threat was confirmed. Lisa's firewall had been breached. Encrypted emails were missing. Sensitive evidence deleted. Her phone stopped working, hijacked remotely. But worst of all, the DOJ contact, Agent Halston, gone dark. His number rang into silence. Robert tried his emergency line. No answer. Something was very wrong. Lisa looked at Robert, her voice shaking. They've gone underground. They're covering everything. If we don't move now, we lose it all. Robert faced a decision no CEO ever expects to make. His life was in danger. Lisa was being stalked. The DOJ might have been compromised. But he had one thing left. The people. His staff. His employees. The ones Langston exploited, ignored, and discarded for years. So he gathered them all, every department, from janitors to senior analysts. And he told them the truth. The spying. The profiling. The systemic targeting of black employees. The government ties. The cover-up. He risked everything. And the room? Silent at first. Then, thunderous applause. Scene 3. The people rise. That same day, a mass employee walkout began. Hundreds left their cubicles. They poured into the streets of downtown Chicago, carrying signs that said, "We are not data. Justice isn't optional. Respect starts at the bottom." Media caught wind. It went viral. The DOJ had no choice but to reopen contact. Halston resurfaced. He'd been forced underground after discovering that Langston's private intelligence firm had infiltrated parts of the investigation. Now, with national attention mounting, Halston gave Robert one last mission. Get to the top floor. There's a terminal. It holds everything. Robert and Lisa returned to Langston one last time. But they weren't alone. Behind them stood a federal raid team, DOJ agents in plainclothes, and several wrongfully terminated employees now armed with evidence, testimonies, and unshakable resolve. Inside, the building buzzed in confusion. Executives scattered like cockroaches under light. On the 42nd floor, Robert entered the private server room. He logged in. And just before extracting the files, Tom barged in, eyes wide with rage. "You think you're a hero? You'll burn for this, Robert. You hear me? You'll burn." Robert stared at him calmly. "The only thing burning today is your empire." He clicked Upload to DOJ. It was done. The fallout was swift. Langston's stock plummeted. Their entire executive board was indicted. Over a dozen companies in the Project Clean Hands network were exposed. Multi-million-dollar lawsuits followed. But the moment that defined it all was when Robert stepped to the podium at a national press conference and announced, effective immediately, Langston Technologies will be restructured under an employee-owned model, with full transparency, real accountability, and a seat at the table for the very people who were once told they didn't belong in the building. Weeks later, Robert returned to the empty HR office. Karen's nameplate was gone. The desk, cleaned out. He picked up a stray file still left behind. It was an unsigned termination notice, for him, dated 6 months ago. She had tried to erase him, to humiliate him, to bury him under corporate racism, elitism, and fear. But he'd survived. Lisa walked in behind him. "We built something better, Rob. They built a wall to keep us out. And now, we turned it into a door." He smiled. Not out of pride, but peace. In the end, Robert Ellis wasn't just a CEO who went undercover. He became something far more dangerous to the system that tried to break him. A mirror. He showed the world how ugly it looked when no one was watching. He showed what happens when power goes unchecked. But more importantly, he showed what one voice can do when it refuses to be silenced. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is get your hands dirty, to walk where no one expects you to walk, to see what they never wanted you to see. Because justice doesn't wear a suit. It doesn't sit behind a desk. Justice starts at the bottom and rises with every step you take back. Life lesson. Don't let your title define your strength. Sometimes the janitor holds more power than the CEO, because truth, once uncovered, cannot be ignored. But just as Robert thought the storm had passed, a new envelope appeared at his door. No return address. Just a single line typed on paper. You only took down one company. Are you ready to find out how deep this goes? Let us know where you are watching from in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe, like and turn on your notification bell so that you can be the first to enjoy our amazing stories.